All right, so I'm going to be talking about harmful algal blooms in Maine and how the bloom dynamics have been changing over the last few years and how that impacts shellfish harvesters. So harmful algal blooms are blooms of phytoplankton that can be harmful to humans or to other organisms. I'm going to be talking about marine halves, which produce biotoxins that can be harmful to humans. So these are the I don't know if I can work this. There we go. So these are the three species of harmful algal bloom phytoplankton species that the DMR monitors for public health risks. The species that we've been most concerned with in Maine historically is Alexandrium, which produces saxitoxin, which causes paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP. Over the last couple of years, we've also had some issues with Pseudonychia, which produces domoic acid and causes amnesic shellfish poisoning, or ASP. And then we also monitor for Dinophysis, though we haven't really had any problems with that in the past. And it produces ocadaic acid, which causes diuretic shellfish poisoning, or DSP. And so the reason that we monitor for these shellfish, that we regulate for them, is because as shellfish feed on these blooms, because they're filter feeders, they accumulate these toxins in their tissues. So when we go and eat those shellfish, they can make us sick. So the other thing to note is that different species of shellfish accumulate these toxins at different rates and also hang on to them at different rates, they clear them out of their system at different rates. So mussels take up the toxins very quickly, but they also clear them out of their system in only a matter of days, as opposed to scallops, which hang on to the toxins much longer, and it can take years for them to clear them out of their system. So that's very important if you're someone who's interested in selling whole scallops. So both in Maine and globally, we are seeing changes in harmful algal bloom dynamics. They're increasing in frequency, intensity, duration, and geographic extent. And climate change is one of the major factors that is changing these dynamics. As global temperatures increase with increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide, water temperatures are increasing, which promotes bloom growth. So if we have more blooms, we have more biotoxins in the water, more toxic shellfish, and blooms can also cause low oxygen, which can also be harmful to shellfish. So Maine has one of the longest standing and most extensive biotoxin monitoring programs in the country. They've been monitoring biotoxins since about the 50s, and DMR collects shellfish toxin samples at about 150 sites along the coast, so those are the red dots that are along the coast. And then DMR, along with a network of volunteers, and that's the program that we participate in, we measure the phytoplankton levels in the water. And so the DMR sites are these green dots, and then the volunteer sites are these blue dots that are up and down the coast. That's our site right there. Oh, and so I was also going to say that DMR uses this monitoring information to make decisions about regulatory closures. So historically in Maine, as I mentioned, we have been mostly worried about blooms of Alexandrium, which cause paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP. And we've had a number of pretty bad years, and this is a graph of PSP closures since the late 70s. So you can see there's a lot of variability in the number of closures, but there are some particularly bad years were 1972, 1980, and 2005. And looking at this map, these are saxitoxin levels in shellfish meat. Those black dots are very high levels. So you can see there we're detecting high levels all up and down the coast. So just shows you the extent of some of these blooms in the past. So more recently, we've seen some changing dynamics in these Alexandrium blooms. So this map on the left here, these are DMR's, this is DMR's data for saxitoxin levels in shellfish meat. And the bigger the dot, the higher the toxin detected. So you see some high levels of toxin detected in Casco Bay and also down east. This is a pretty typical year compared to 2019. We are seeing some pretty different conditions with really high toxin levels all along the southern coast of Maine and up into the mid-coast. And then also extending further south down east. So we're seeing longer blooms. We're seeing longer blooms and that they're increasing in geographic extent. And so overall, this is means that they're becoming less predictable. So additionally, in the last few years, we've had some problems with a new species, or not a new species, but a species that we've never had problems with before. And so in 2016, DMR unexpectedly detected high levels of domoic acid in shellfish meat down east. So it's this map over here. And that was produced by a bloom of Pseudonychia, which has primarily been an issue on the West Coast. We haven't really had many issues with it here in Maine. One challenge was the bloom became toxic very, very quickly, so DMR had to issue a mussel recall as a result. Similar story in 2017, and again, the bloom became toxic very quickly, and again, DMR had to issue a recall. The only difference was that the bloom extended into Casco Bay as well. So, story here is this is our new normal. We're seeing longer blooms, longer blooms that are changing in geographic extent. We're having problems with new species and overall just less predictability in how these blooms behave. And so 2017 was the worst combined year for both Alexandrian and Pseudonychia blooms. One of the challenges is they bloom at different times of the year. So in 2017, there were some harvesters that were closed for as long as 6 months, which I'm sure some of you remember. So some other species that DMR doesn't monitor for because they aren't a public health risk, but you should be aware of as shellfish harvesters are Crinium moitoi. There was a bloom of this a couple years ago, which caused low oxygen levels, and there was a clam die-off as a result. And then also Margolethidinium polycricoides, which you've probably heard called cochlidinium. And this has been an issue in Massachusetts. And we have seen it in very low levels in Maine, but haven't had any problems with it, but something to think about for the future, or be aware of it. So with increasing blooms, there's increasing closures, so what can you do as an industry member? You can get an MOU with DMR, which allows you to test your shellfish, and if the shellfish is safe, then you can continue to harvest during a closure. So this is a graph of the number of MOUs that DMR has had over the last few years. So the number has been increasing as the industry has been growing. A note that wild harvesters and limited purpose aquaculture license holders cannot get MOUs, only aquaculture leaseholders can get MOUs. And this was the breakdown of MOUs in 2019 by species. So I also wanted to show you just a couple examples of what some other agencies across the world are doing to deliver some of this information to the industry. So this is Ireland's weekly HAB bulletin that they put out for the industry, and it shows the different toxin levels and phytoplankton levels along the coast. This is a map from British Columbia, and so they put all their closures on this web-based map, pretty similar to the map that DMR produces as well. So they have all these different types of closures, and then you can also click on each closure, and it will give you additional information about that closure, link you to the notices. It's a pretty neat tool. This is one from France that you can just scroll through the historic toxin data, or actually I think these are phytoplankton levels, but same idea, just see how it's changed over time. So as harvesters, what should you be thinking about in terms of HABs? When you're selecting sites, you should know what the HAB dynamics have been at that site and how they might be changing. HABs are also a concern for product liability. So as a shellfish industry, you have a collective responsibility to pay attention to what's going on so you can prevent recalls and illnesses. You can also be an advocate for clean water because reducing nutrient and pollution inputs can help to control these blooms. And for harvesting, you also want to be planning for more closures and for less predictability in those closures. And then finally, DMR monitors biotoxins for public health and regulatory compliance. And as the industry continues to grow, you may need to share in that responsibility and cost for monitoring HABs. And you will also want to pay attention to HAB species that DMR is not required to monitor for, like I mentioned before. So that's it.